have stood at the front lines of law, leadership, and public service. From the courtroom to the classroom, Attorney Karen Jimeno brings sharp legal insight, academic excellence, and a voice that has guided national conversations. Attorney Mike Toledo, a seasoned public affairs strategist and legal mind with years in media, corporate leadership, and government reform. Together, they bring law to life with experience, integrity, and the courage to ask hard questions. Two minds shaped by the law. Two voices trusted in and out of the courtroom. This is Abogado.
Good evening. Welcome to Abogado, your forum for informed discussion on the legal challenges shaping our democracy. I'm Attorney Mike Toledo.
And I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. Tonight, we turn to an issue sparking public debate, both online and offline: the flaunting of luxury by public figures and their families. To set the stage, let's take a closer look at our proposition.
Luxury cars, branded bags, lavish vacations, and million-peso parties. In a country grappling with deep inequality, public displays of extreme wealth often spark outrage, especially when linked to the public officials. Contractors are those doing business with the government. Some say the law already draws the line through anti-graft laws, asset forfeiture, and money laundering rules. They argue suspicion isn't proof and family ties aren't guilt. Judging by appearance alone risks violating basic rights. But others warn flaunted wealth tied to corruption fuels public distrust. And in an age of glamorized impunity, visibility should carry consequences. It's an issue between stronger enforcement and the protection of individual rights. Should public display of wealth reasonably linked to corruption be grounds for legal liability?
Joining us tonight is Attorney Espiritu, a lawyer, labor leader, and outspoken voice in public discourse.
He is the president of Bukluran ng Manggagawang Pilipino, and he earned his AB Communication and Juris Doctor degrees from the Ateneo de Manila University. He is known for his advocacy on labor rights, transparency, and accountability. Good evening, Attorney Luke.
Good evening, Attorney Mike, Attorney Karen. I'm glad to be invited here.
Great, and it's going to be a great discussion among three lawyers. Let's start, Attorney Luke, yung trending ngayon, Nepo babies that are flaunting their lavish lifestyles. Nearly everyone is condemning the flaunting of wealth by the so-called Nepo babies. Tinatawag din silang Disney princesses. Few raise the issue of due process. From a legal standpoint, why is due process still important in debates like this, even if most people dismiss it?
Well, I think kapag atin silang kinundina for committing crime, kailangan may due process to do that. Pero we must distinguish between charging them for crimes and simply criticizing their attitude, yung kanilang naging conduct, flaunting their wealth, kasi that is part of free speech. So for everyone, dahil you made public yung lifestyle mo, you are offering to the public something that could be subject of public comment. So, dyan, kapag nag-exercise ng free speech, when you do that, you don't say, hey, eto ba ay bibigyan ko siya ng due process? You're just simply commenting. Due process does not play in that kind of a situation. Pero pagka kinasuhan mo siya of something, a criminal act, well, you cannot convict someone kapag walang due process. That's where due process will come into play.
Now, Attorney Luke, doesn't the massive backlash also na nakikita natin, grabe talagang ang backlash sa mga Nepo babies because of what's been going on, does this also touch on a deeper constitutional principle that at the end of the day, it's on the Constitution and in several laws of the country, public office is a public trust. And and lifestyles that are, let's say, beyond any government official's means would be subject to scrutiny somehow.
Yes, oo. I think we could come up with a policy. Importante dito policy. Kasi the laws are already existing unless you really want to legislate more. Pero habang wala ka pang bagong legislation on how you deal with lavish lifestyle o kaya ostentatious display of wealth, kung wala ka pang specific law to do that, what you have to do is to examine existing laws and come up with a policy wherein you're gonna apply those laws. For example, merong ganyan, mga nepo babies, fino-flaunt nila yung kanilang wealth. Then we know that under existing laws, kapag medyo may discrepancy between your earnings as a public official and yung iyong mga assets, yung mga property, evidensyari yan ng graft and corruption. It could even be used as a presumption na meron kang ill-gotten wealth. So you have that under your law now. Then if you have a policy of going after yung mga tiwaling opisyal, then you could use that as evidence. And you must, take all of this ostentatious display of wealth as evidence in order now to go against the public officials.
Well, this reminds me of the case of Napoles years ago. Because by the time there was a case filed against her, lumutang na rin yung mga social media posts ng daughter niya of, I think like an expensive apartment na supposedly nabili ng daughter niya in mga parties.
Na nasa limousine sila, di ba?
Oo, sa
in
US.
LA, in the US.
Oo. So I think to that extent, medyo helpful din siya when you're already trying to prosecute someone criminally for graft and corruption. But I have a question, Attorney Luke. When it comes to the law that requires public officials to lead modest lives, that's in Article 11, Section 1 of the Philippine Constitution, that public office is a public trust and public officials are required to lead modest lives. Does that apply to their children as well?
Yes, definitely. Para sa akin, yan ay kaparte because syempre, their children, they use whatever wealth generated by the parents na public officer. So kapag ang children nila ay, sabihin natin, nilulustay ang pera, nagta-travel abroad, merong mga luxury vehicles, may luxury na mga bags, then I think it also reflects on the public official na they don't lead modest lives by extension and by necessary implication. And so, kung pag merong ganyan sa ating constitution, it should form part of their ethics as public officials. Meron tayong code of ethics and standards for public officials and employees. And in fact, it is a direct liability that you could file now before the graft court with the ombudsman, di ba? It could be an administrative case, the conduct alone. Now, medyo broad din naman ang code of conduct natin. And it could be used, I think, for many different situations. And it could be tied, lalo na it could be tied to yung pag-compare ng kita ng public official. For example, DPWH ka. Iswelduhan ka lang eh. Eh bakit ka naman, ba't ang anak mo merong luxury car?
Parang or yung merong isang vlogger na napakalaki ng walk-in closet niya, pati ang mamahal na bag niya, may Birkin pa. And then, sa isang post niya, well, kinuha yon at merong nag-post naman na in-expose doon na yung tatay niya, customs director. Not even deputy commissioner or director. So parang pag inisip mo, hindi commensurate yung salary ng tatay niya. Eh, doon pa naman sa video yung sinasabi niya, thank you, Dad, for being my endless ATM.
Oh, yan ang masaklap eh. Siguro the daughter meant well. Telling, kasi iba na, di ba, aminin natin, iba na talaga mindset ng mga kabataan ngayon. I mean, it's really a different mindset from during, for example, my time. I mean, nowadays, people are actually showing to the public whatever they do, what they eat, where they go. Maybe it's a little bit of trying to tell people that we're doing better than you guys or really just sharing their experience. Pero ang nangyayari, yung sa iba, nagiging aspirational. Di ba? Parang, uy, siguro someday, masusundin, magagaya ko din. I'll be able to go to those places. But in other cases, actually, nagiging negative effect sa mga bata. They demand from their parents. Now, dito naman on the side of what we're discussing now, no, ditong mga nepo babies na flaunting ang
their
mga wealth nila na nakukuha from questionable sources, siguro dapat pagsabihan una ng parents, no? Na I mean, you don't flaunt in general whether or not the source came from. Huwag kang magyabang, di ba? Parang ganon. Pero ano nangyayari kasi dito, siguro talaga nagyayabang, not knowing the repercussions sa pamilya, or talagang they're just trying to share. Kasi ganyan na nga ang mindset ng kabataan ngayon. Pero going back a bit, partner dun sa ombudsman, parang, di ba, ang ombudsman also can motu proprio. Di ba? On their own.
Investigate.
Investigate.
Yeah.
So, bakit kaya sa iyong pananaw, with all these things that's going on right now, na nakikita natin, I'm glad that Attorney Karen brought the Polis case in the discussion. No? Nung panahon pa ni Napoles at mga kasong ganito, similar cases that's been happening, and especially now, when naglabasan na talaga sa congressional at Senate hearing, bakit wala man lang aksyon ang ating ombudsman?
I wanna be fair to the ombudsman kasi with the onset of social media, ito yung mga public display ng wealth. It's a new phenomenon. Kasi siguro kung before gusto mong magyabang, you cannot do so nang walang social media. Pwede mo ipagyabang sa mga immediate social circle mo lang. Pero right now, kapag ikaw nagyabang ng iyong yaman, lalabas mo sa social media, milyon-milyon ang makaka-view. So it is like a new phenomenon. And we would like to tell the ombudsman, napaka-broad ng powers nyo. Hindi lang naman investigate for prosecution ang pwede nilang gawin. Actually, pwede lang sabihan, stop doing that. Broad ang powers ng ombudsman. In fact, may nag-argue nga na instead of the Solicitor General being the tribune of the people officially, it should be the ombudsman. Because the ombudsman can do anything. Pwede niyang sabihan yung mga public officials na hindi ginagawa ang trabaho nila, hoy, gawin mo ang trabaho mo. Hindi lang simpleng prosecution. Well, of course, mainly ang ginagawa ng ombudsman ay para siyang prosecutor ng crimes. Pero nagagawa ng ombudsman yan. Now, using that constitutional injunction with our public officials that they must lead modest lives, I think it is still within the power of the ombudsman. Meron tayong constitutional provision na. Meron din tayong code of conduct and ethical standards for public officials and employees. Now, nakita ko sa Facebook, ang anak mo ay naglalabas ng kanyang travels abroad, yung punta niya sa beach pagkakaroon niya ng yaman.
At yung iba, private plane pa.
Private plane pa. The ombudsman could actually write that public official in the broad powers of the ombudsman, like the tribune of the people, and tell that public official, hey, you don't do that. You must lead modest lives. And then you at least using that, and then use it as evidence too, to make more profound or medyo deeper scrutiny as to the source of that wealth, and can even use that as evidence. And I would even say that such displays of extravagance can even be considered presumptive of ill-gotten wealth. Because we can make that legal presumption. Kasi ang paggagawa naman ng legal presumption, you have premises eh. Like the premise is, ito lang ang sahod mo bilang DPWH official. Pero bakit doon pa lang sa travel ng anak mo, ito ay umaabot na ng milyon-milyon? Mukhang hindi mo naman kaya yan. And then, using logic, you can make a legal presumption na legally, you're presumed to have sourced that from ill-gotten wealth. And then proceed to cause prosecution and eventual liability doon sa public official concerned.
Well, speaking of liability, would the Nepo babies or Nepo spouses be held liable as well for spending ill-gotten wealth? Can they claim, in a sense, that they had no idea that the wealth that they're enjoying and using comes from the proceeds of graft and corruption?
Well, at least it can be evidentiary. Yun ang pinaka-kuha natin fallback. Pwede siyang ebidensya. Kahit kung asawa mo gumastos, it can be evidentiary, it can be a legal presumption in fact. Liability, yes, ang problem sa criminal laws natin, kailangan meron siyang, alam mo yun, may knowledge siya, may criminal intent siya.
What about sa money laundering, anti-money laundering law? Kasi there was I heard an opinion of a vlogger lawyer na sabi niya, using the proceeds of ill-gotten wealth for your own enjoyment can also be considered as money laundering.
Yes, but in every criminal law, kailangan meron kang criminal intent. So, we could use it as evidence because intent is a state of the mind. Di ba? It could lead to your exact participation in the crime. We could gauge intent from your actions. Pero hindi automatic. Hindi siya auto. It depends on the circumstances.
Attorney Luke, you mentioned yung sa ombudsman, yung tanong ko kanina about the ombudsman, motu proprio, they can do it, di ba? At sinabi mo nga na malawak ang kanilang karapatan. Pwede nilang sabihan, tumigil kayo dyan. Meron tayong provision sa Civil Code on Human Relations, di ba?
Yeah.
Article 25.
Yes.
Siguro kailangan malaman ng ating mga tagapanood na there is a particular provision in the Civil Code, Article 25, which says that during times of want, during times of
Public want or
emergencies, like for example, during the pandemic, or perhaps during now with the flooding and the economy not doing so well because of what's going on in the world,
crisis.
di ba? Of the crisis. They can be stopped, no? They can be stopped. And sinabi sa batas na pwede nilang filean ng civil case.
Yes.
Yeah, di ba? It could be an ordinary citizen, di ba? Or it could be a charitable institution, no? That can lead it, no? So, sa aking ano lang, bakit dito sa nangyayari ngayon, wala pa akong alam na gumamit sa provision na ito sa Civil Code. Sa tingin nyo, bakit kaya?
Kasi siguro sa practical lang yan eh. Ba't mo naman gagawin yon? Mas gusto nating ipakukulong sila, di ba?
Okay.
Well, but this also applies to any person, right? Like the section or Article 25 of the Civil Code says, thoughtless extravagance in expenses for pleasure or display during a period of acute public want or emergency may be stopped by order of the courts at the instance of any government or private charitable institution. So it's up to the government or a charitable institution.
Yes.
Kaya nga, yun nga, bakit wala parang nakakalimutan tong provision na to na malawak din. Kumbaga, in other words, we have, in my view, partner, di ba? We have so many laws. We have the Code of Ethical Conduct, the Anti-Graft, we have the Plunder Law, and we have several other related laws. The Ombudsman Law, for example, also this particular provision of the Civil Code. And yet, it seems like we're getting nowhere as far as the filing of cases and proving the guilt of these people are.
I agree with you. No? We have existing laws. Ang problem is pieces of the puzzle sila. I would say, if we really want to have a more comprehensive legislation, we must introduce one. Okay? Pero right now, na wala pang ganyan, punishing or attaching liability into the act itself, which is really being extravagant. Wala pang exact except that Civil Code provision. What we can do actually is to take all of this legal basis and create a strategy in order supuin natin unang-una ang corruption. It's just like kung ginawa nila kay Al Capone. They cannot pin down Al Capone on organized crime.
Yeah.
So what the U.S. federal government did is to get what is existing. Ang pinaka hindi ine-expect ni Al Capone.
Correct.
Which is to use his income, his lavish lifestyle, and then compare it with his income, and then use it as evidence of what? Tax evasion.
Tax evasion. Correct.
Hindi niya ma-explain ngayon.
Correct.
Bakit ito ang gastos mo, pero ito lang dineclare mo ang kita.
Yes.
So, that what
and
I was saying.
they were able to send him to jail for that. Yeah.
So, if we really want, dahil wala tayong direct na batas that relates to that, we could use existing laws. However, indirect, but we must have a consistent policy. Using these laws now, our consistent policy right now is to really punish the corrupt.
Nakalusot siya sa murder, partner, nakalusot siya sa racketeering, nakalusot sa kung ano-ano, pero dito siya nahuli sa Internal Revenue Tax Evasion.
Yeah.
And by the way, just as an aside, he died of syphilis while he was in jail.
Yes.
Yeah. What a tragic end.
Yeah, but at least merong some form of accountability.
Yes.
Well, Attorney Luke, would you make a distinction between the public officials that are involved in this flood control scandal and the money they made from that, that's obviously ill-gotten wealth, pag kumukuha silang porsyento sa proyekto, with respect to contractors who also display their lavish lifestyles? And I think As an example, the spouses this kaya have gotten like a big brunt of the anger of the public nung nakita kung gaano karami luxury cars nila. When arguably, they can also say, we spent 23 years building our construction business. So, wala pa tayong nakikita rin na proof kung sasabihin din ba natin ill-gotten wealth ito when they did participate in the public biddings of the DPWH and forced pa daw sila, according to Curly, magbigay sa mga public officials nung hinihingi sa kanilang mga cut.
Actually, simple lang naman din. Like, for example, ito ang kontrata mo sa gobyerno. You could actually quantify that. Ito ang nireport mong income ng iyong construction firm. Tapos, tandaan mo ang fact na nakikipagkontrata ka sa gobyerno. Di ba? So, kung ang iyong income ng iyong kumpanya, ang nireport mo ay ganito kaliit, pero nakita naman sa iyo na ganito kalaki ang iyong ginagastos, iyong 28 luxury cars ka. Pag sinuma mo yan, sobrang laki niyan kumpara dun sa kita ng construction firm mo. And the fact na sa gobyerno ka nakikipagkontrata. Then again, that indicates graft and corruption. Then, if you are part of yung ganong crime na graft and corruption, the private individual, kahit hindi siya public official, should be charged with the public official. And should be charged of graft and corruption. So, in that sense, hindi dapat dinidistinguish kung ano yung paglulustay ng mga private contractor at ng mga public officials. Kasi sa ating Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act, ay kinukonsider silang iisa. They cannot evade liability just because...
It takes two to tango.
Oo, it takes two to tango. They cannot
Bribery
evade liability.
Bribery.
Diba? Bribery. Actually, conspiracy, actually.
Like for me, yung crime kasi doon would be the bribery aspect because you offered a bribe to a public official. Pero yung, let's say, nakakuha ka ng income from that, would that still
if it is legitimate, no problem. If you could, if the math will balance out, di ba? Kung talagang
so, ibig sabihin, let's say, nagbayad ka ng bribe, pero because of that, because ganun ang sistema na sa atin, na kailangan mo talagang magbigay to someone higher or in the government to win the contract. But you delivered the project and nabawasan lang yung kita mo because you had to give to people in government. Then would you make that distinction na
yes,
yung wealth na yun
I can. Pero nasa context kasi tayo ng the entire flood control project scandal, which involves ghost projects. For one.
Yeah, ghost project, I think. Like,
hindi ka na lang nagbibigay ng 30 to 40%. You're actually in cahoots with the public official that, hey, let's create a fake flood control project. Okay? Let's not deliver on it. Hatian natin ng pera.
So talagang doon,
hindi lang bribery yun.
Conspiracy talaga, magkasama sila.
Tsaka doon wala ka nang dineliver. Wala kang cost. So really, your intention is not even to do a project, but just to earn.
Pero even if the 30 to 40%, you're also involved in the falsification of the cost of a project. So it's not simply bribery. Diba? Sinabi mo, halimbawa, ang cost ng project ay 100 million. Binigyan mo ng 40 million si senator o si congressman, pero you represented that, the actual cost of the project is 100 million, you're still in conspiracy. Pero kapag halimbawa, sabihin natin, totoong cost ng project ay 100 million and you delivered on the 100 million and meron ka ngayong kita, profit na malinis sa'yo dyan ay sabihin natin 10 million, tapos binigyan mo part of your 10 million si congressman o si senator, yun ang bribery. Pero nag-falsify ka eh. Dahil para mabigay mo yung 30 to 40% ni mayor, ni congressman, ni senator, then you become a co-conspirator.
Alam mo, partner, dito sa Ghost Project, ito pa nakakatawa no, nakita natin when we saw during the testimonies during the hearings. So you have a Ghost Project. And then a year after, you have a budget to repair the Ghost Project. And
actually, yun ang sinabi ni Senator Ping, yun ang hindi niya na siguro matake din na parang hindi na nakontento sa isang Ghost Project. Gumawa pa ng second Ghost Project.
Repair daw.
Pero hindi pa rin ginawa.
Grabe, no?
Diba?
Arising from the primary Ghost.
Yeah, but, Attorney, look, itong gusto kong tanungin, and I think maybe our listeners would also like to know. Okay, they're talking about huge sums of money here. Talking about the billions. Napoles is small fry compared to what we're hearing now, di ba? But what do you think? Where does the banks and other non-bank financial institutions come in? in order to be able to help out and ensure that things like this does not happen. I mean, the huge withdrawals, perhaps, the huge deposits, AMLA should
Yes,
somehow weigh itself in as well. So, ano sa iyong pananaw? Ano ang pwedeng gawin ng ating mga sa banking system, knowing that huge amounts of money moving around?
Yes, that should be covered by anti-money laundering laws, di ba? Because they would be facilitating the transfer of monies, ill-gotten wealth. Pero tanda natin, kailangan kasi may aksyon ng gobyerno yan eh. Like, sasabihin lang naman ng bangko para sa amin, on paper. Ito, lahat nakapapil naman eh. Di ba? I mean, ano naman ang trabaho namin? Magre-release lang kami, magpapautang lang kami, or whatever. Ano naman magagawa?
Wala bang red flags yan?
Well, ang red flags kasi natin sa money laundering ay yung mga amount na more than 500,000 for deposits, di ba? I think we should amend the law if that's the case, di ba? Na kapag ito yung public works project, di ba? Tapos nag-handle ng mga ganitong klaseng pera, we must have an amendatory law in order to cover all of the situations para magkaroon ng pag-monitor sa transfer of monies.
Yeah, or I think
Otherwise,
siguro yung sa
diba?
payment system for government contracts,
Yes.
kailangan baguhin or by law, they have to come up with the system na mas may transparency.
Yes, oo. At safeguards, di ba?
Well, going back to Nepo babies, where do we draw the line, Attorney Luke, when it comes to shaming and canceling people? Because apparently, a lot of these Nepo
Yes.
babies used to be parang lifestyle vloggers na maraming followers.
Yes.
And then it was only later that a lot of the followers started to realize that this person I'm following is using my own taxpayers' money for their lifestyle. So marami ring canceling and public shaming. Where do you draw the line between that na nasa free speech and expression towards like maybe becoming libelous yung mga comments?
Well, may existing limits naman sa free speech, di ba? Existing limits, hindi ka pwedeng, mambastos, you cannot impute crime, vice, or defect. Pero sa ganitong sitwasyon kasi, pasok din kasi yung mga defense against libel eh. Kumbaga, limits of free speech, you cannot impute crime, vice, or defect. But then, tandaan din natin, ibinabalanse natin yan sa freedom of expression. At sa freedom of expression, public issue ito eh. Public issue involving public officials. It is subject to comment. Andyan yung onion skin standard. Hindi ka pwedeng maging onion skin.
And does that apply to the children of the public officials?
Because they are making public their own personalities also. Tanda natin ang definition ng public figure.
Yes.
And,
sa libel law, it's not public officials, it's public figures. Yeah.
So since naabot naman nila din siguro yung level ng pagiging public figure, vlogger nga
Kasi,
sila eh.
di ba, if ang standard na nabasa ko sa mga Supreme Court decisions, if you've achieved a certain level of notoriety or,
Yes.
also popularity, public figure ka
Correct.
na.
Yung nakaka-influence ka na. Di ba? Nakaka-influence ka na ibang tao because of your stature. Public figure ka na.
So in this case, talagang bukas na bukas siya sa criticisms at papasok siya sa protected speech. Siguro yung the most hateful na lang ang pwede mo masasabi na meron kang actual malice. Because in this case, kapag public figure ang involved, you must prove actual malice.
And it's the public figure that has that burden of proving na may
actual
actual malice
malice.
dun sa nag-comment or nagsabi.
And actual malice really means it is not true. Importante ang truth doon eh. In order to show actual malice. Because the definition of actual malice is it is not true and there is reckless disregard
Of the truth.
as to whether it is true or not. Ibig sabihin, kung totoo yun, at criticize ka nun, mahirap ka mag-prove ng actual malice. So, pasok siya sa protected speech.
Ang isang pwede natin tignan din, Attorney Luke, di ba parang, if assuming we agree sa affirmative proposition, di ba, na mere display of wealth opens you up to liability, civil or criminal for that matter. Di ba, it also opens the doors to a possibility na ito ay ma-abuse. It can be abused. It can be weaponized Because the mere fact that, for example, you are seen with 10 cars and a beautiful home in a subdivision somewhere, not knowing for a fact that perhaps these were inherited or these were legitimate results of your hard work before you joined government. We know of a couple of people who, after being successful in the corporate world, were asked to make a sacrifice, to pay forward, na tulungan yung gobyerno. And iba dyan, nag-hesitate. I know of many na talaga nag-hesitate kasi alam nila ang difficulty, yung pag-file lang ng SALN, malasakit na ng ulo, confirmation sa CA, and when you're already in government, alam mo naman ang mga problema, mga intriga, mga problema na harapin mo. So, paano yan ngayon? It just so happened that you were perhaps, you worked hard for it, or you were born rich, but you're now in government, nakita nila, at titirahin ka na. Pwedeng i-weaponize. Kaya, para sa akin, baka doon tayo sa negative. No? Huwag tayong pumayag na mere display or show of wealth can trigger any legal action. Ano pong pananaw niyo?
Kung pag-usapan natin, kasi maraming levels pumapasok itong usapan nito. Pag pinag-usapan natin yung public comment, diba, all you have to do is to defend yourself. Makikipagbakbakan ka. Trabaho mo yan, makipagdebate ka. Hindi ka dapat nagiging onion skin. Bakbakan ka sa public space kung saan create mo. Pero pag pinag-usapan natin ang isang legal proceeding against you, then you also defend yourself. Meron namang process in order for you to dispute na ito ay hindi ill-gotten wealth. Ang gobyerno na nagpo-prosecute sa iyo, pwedeng gamitin yan as evidence against you. And will file cases in order to prove na galing yan sa ill-gotten wealth. Meron ka namang chance in order to disprove that. So I don't see any issue with regards to a public official now being under scrutiny and under spotlight, not to be given a chance to disprove the allegations. There will always be an opportunity for that public official in many levels of the investigation or in many levels of the public discourse to do that. It is not denied him or her.
Well, I want to ask about the obligation of public officials to speak out and explain kung sakali naman sila yung mga may nepo babies or nepo wives na nagdi-display ng lavish lifestyles nila. So, for example, Claudine Ko is one of those that's been trending. Yung anak ni Christopher Ko that also had a position in Congress and is one of the founders of High Tone Construction Corporation, kapatid ni Zaldi Ko. So, yung lumabas na lahat ng videos nung anak niya kasi she was vlogging before about their own private planes, about their big houses, and yung expensive lifestyle niya, pati mga travels niya. But Christopher Ko and Zaldi Ko have been very quiet. Palagi mo ba part of that obligation na public offices of public trust is to also explain if an issue like this arises?
Yes, it is. Doon lang tayo sa level ng sa level ng ethics, no? It is incumbent upon any public official na kapag merong kahit papano prima facie showing or evidence na ito ay lagpas sa kinikita mo and it should now be presumed na ill-gotten wealth yan, it shifts the burden. Dapat it shifts the burden kasi may presumption. Dali lang naman i-establish ang legal presumption. I think it's an existing presumption na kapag ang kita mo ay hindi kaparehas ng iyong yaman, may legal presumption na galing yan sa illegal na means. So, the result of that is, nasi-shift ang burden. Imbis na ipoprove, kasi may presumption na nga, ipoprove further na yan ay ill-gotten wealth, ikaw ngayon ang may burden as a public official na ipaliwanag na, hey, akala nyo lang na ang aking kita ay hindi kasing laki ng aking yaman. Kasi bukod pa sa aking sweldo, merong negosyo kami. Meron kaming palaisdaan, meron kaming restaurant. Ikaw magpaliwanag nun. Kung ikaw ay silent, then the legal presumption will attach. And when we file cases against you, and you will still keep silent, then dapat mayayari ka doon kasi wala kang paliwanag. So in these cases kasi, involving public officials because of Article 11 and all the laws that spring from Article 11 of our Constitution, that public office is a public trust, it will really be incumbent upon the public official to explain.
Tama yung sinabi ni Attorney Luke na answer your question, partner, no, na kung tahimik ka when you are being asked these very, very important and crucial questions, questioning your integrity already as a public official, at hindi ka sumagot, di ba sinasabi nila, if you're silent, if you do not reply to a question that you should normally answer.
Yes, another presumption yan.
Another presumption yan. Then perhaps you are guilty. Diba?
Silence is an admission of guilt.
Exactly.
What
diba?
if sabihin nila as a defense, so it's my prerogative to remain silent
Or
and
right
antay na lang nila mamatay yung issue?
Well, it is your right to remain silent. Pero iba rin naman kasi ang evidentiary kasi yung pinag-usapan natin. Kasi in the law on evidence, maraming mga bagay that can actually be concluded from facts already known. Diba? From facts already known, you could conclude something. And from those facts already known, the conclusion, which we call legal presumption, is now evidence. It's already established. And ikaw ngayon dapat ang magpaliwanag noon.
Yeah. Oo, talagang very interesting conversation. It's good that we have Attorney Luke to explain to us the legal aspects of this issue. We'll have to pause for a quick break, but our conversation with Attorney Luke Espiritu continues right after. This is Abogado.
Welcome back. You are watching Abogado. Before the break, Attorney Luke Espiritu discussed the legal and social context behind the massive online outrage against flaunted wealth and constitutional questions it raises.
Attorney Luke, we'd like to hear your final thoughts on this issue. For me, one of the questions I want to ask would be, where do you see reforms happening? There appears to be a lot of gaps in our laws that exist. Kaya ngayon marami pang unchecked ways of siphoning money out of our government public funds. And then you see the families now using these funds as well. Buti na lang pala, may nagpo-post at tawag nila dito yung culture of flexing. Mahilig mag-flex ng mga yaman nila sa mga social media, but at least it's providing evidence. But do you think we should make SALN also a requirement for family members of public officials? Because maraming mga public officials nagpapangalan ng assets sa mga kapatid, sa mga anak nila para hindi makita. So what do you think are some of the creative ways to address the gaps?
You can argue for or against it, but I would argue for it. Kasi I would have my own bias and prejudice towards more accountability for public officials and their families. Alam naman natin because it reflects the situation. Kasi ang corruption ng public official, at nakita natin sa ostentatious display of wealth, it extends to their families. So, yan ang actual na sitwasyon, then you have to extend to the family. So, I am in favor of it. Now, with respect to doon sa mga parang final thoughts on this, para sa akin, while we may have to craft many other laws, ang lawmaking process in history, I have seen na napaka-importante ang direct intervention ng taong bayan. Because without the direct intervention of the masses and of the people, hindi rin naman gagawa ng mga batas that will really clip the power and abuse of those in power. So for me, it is a dialectic and really a relation between the government making laws and instituting reforms and the people on the ground protesting against the corruption, protesting against ostentatious display of wealth. So I do welcome the criticisms against the, nepo babies. Because I think that the consequence of that ay magkakaroon ng parang realization ng gobyerno natin, hey, magbago-bago tayo.
Tsaka parang ito ata partner, sinasabi nga nila na in the past, na-normalize na sa mga Pilipino na yung mga public officials, they're displaying their wealth na meron silang mga bodyguards, nakamamahaling mga SUV papuntang Congress or sa Senate. So, parang tayo tinanggap na natin na, kasi politiko siya, okay lang na ganyan yung lifestyle nila. And then now we see the children. Ang sinabi nga ni Mayor Vico, parang kailangan gawin natin itong nakakadiri.
Yes.
Na para daw magising na tayo.
Para nagiging manhid, no? Kaya siguro isang tanong ko bago tayo magtapos in a few minutes, Attorney Luke, no? Do you think at this point there is really a need to revisit these laws, no? The laws on ethical standards, the anti-graft law, and the other related laws, because somehow a quick perusal of the laws, you could see that there are still some uncertainties and there are still some phrases or words that will be subject to interpretation, like what is modest wealth, no? What is ostentatious display. And we have to bear in mind the Civil Code was passed in 1949. And the Code of Ethical Conduct Charter was passed in 1989, if I'm not mistaken. And these were, like what, more than 30 years ago, definitely. So maybe is the spirit and intent of these laws still applicable in the present? That's why, perhaps, do you agree that there's a need to revisit these laws?
Not only revisit, siguro lalong palakasin. Like, anong consequence? Kapag ang yaman mo ay hindi kapantay ng iyong known sources of wealth. Ano dapat ang consequence nun? Dapat may mga forfeiture ka. Dapat yung legal presumption na ill-gotten wealth yan must lead to yung immediate recourse. Dapat kunin ng gobyerno yan. Kasi galing sa public funds eh. Galing sa ngayon, ikaw ngayon, yung public official ngayon, ang dapat mag-provide ng reason kung bakit itong sobra sa kita mo ay hindi dapat kunin at i-forfeit ng gobyerno.
Which
Ikaw dapat
reminds me, President Bongbong Marcos announced a few weeks ago lifestyle checks for all government officials. He said appointed and even elected. So, ano na nangyari dun sa lifestyle check? Who's conducting that?
Yan ang problem kasi baka yung mga ganyan because hindi mo naman maiwasan to say something eh. It becomes a gesture of giving tokens. Hindi magiging, even if mag-lifestyle check, hindi rin magiging epektibo yan kasi kapag after lifestyle check, then what? Then what? So, ano ang paggagamitan mo? Will that be used in prosecution? Will that be used in further investigation? Will we have people really being held accountable? Yun yung mga next. Token na nga lang, wala pang nangyaring lifestyle check.
Nagkaroon dati ng Office of the Presidential Commission on Anti-Graft and Corruption.
I think during the time of
President Duterte.
yes,
pero
yes.
in-abolish yun dito under this administration. But what are your thoughts on having something similar to that, pero yung talagang in good faith will be conducting lifestyle checks and would have the power for forfeiture, like you mentioned.
Sa kapag lifestyle check, with the help of the BIR and the Bureau of Customs, di ba? Kasi pag nakita, kunyari, magkano itong Ferrari na ito? Tapos, that also opens the avenue to find out if this car was smuggled. Another violation of our Customs and Tariffs Code, di ba? So, pwede bang a stronger coordination?
Tsaka AMLAC also helping kasi someone told me by the time, and I forgot about this na, so, nung time daw ni Napoles, by the time nagkaroon na ng seizure of the bank accounts, zero na raw yung laman.
Marami
kasi
na
nailabas na.
Actually, maganda yan. It should be both a coordinating body, coordinating all law enforcement efforts, coordinating yung banks para ma-ensure walang money laundering, walang mailalabas, coordinating the NBI, the prosecutorial arms. Again, there are precedents in other countries. Like for example, again, halimbawa dun sa Italy, yung kay Judge Falcone, it was an effort. Pag sinabi nilang anti-mafia drive, it's really an anti-mafia drive. Meaning they empowered someone, a committee or a body, na siya ngayon ang magsisita or magkukuman dun sa iba-ibang ahensya at ko-coordinate ang effort. NBI, imbestigan mo to. Bangko, iwan mo yan. Itigil mo yung pag-withdraw dyan. Judge, ito ang aming mga kaso.
So all-encompassing talaga.
All-encompassing. Mayroong tawag dyan, di ba? Pero ginagawa sa mga ibang bagay. Like for example, ginawa yan sa terrorism, Di ba? All of nation approach. Pero of course, I'm not a fan of that kasi ang mga tinitira dyan, mga aktivista, mga labor leaders, di ba? Kaya nyo nga gawin sa mga violation of human rights. Yung all of nation approach, lahat ng mga barangay pinupuntahan, lahat ng mga ahensya ng gobyerno pinupuntahan dahil may terorista daw, pupunta sa Department of Labor, di ba? Sino yung nagko-coordinate lahat doon? NTFL ka. Binigyan nilang budget na bilyon-bilyon. Ginawa nyo nga yan sa pagsusuppress sa aming mga labor groups. Ginagawa nyo nga yan sa mga masasamang intensyon. Bakit hindi nyo gawin ngayon? All of nation approach.
Whole of government.
Whole of government approach.
Yeah.
Na talagang magkaroon ng isang, what you call it, commission or committee na mag-coordinate ng lahat ng ito. At pupuntahan lahat ng mga ahensya ng gobyerno para itulak sila, para magkaroon ng totoong prosecution.
So if there's a will, there's a way. Sana bibigyan nga ng gagawa ng tamang commission with all the right powers.
Ito ngayon, in relation to kasi na-raise yun na yung commission, no? At least nakita natin na sinabi natin Pangulo, at least na-form na yata yung commission at nag-appoint na yata ng 2 tao.
I think
They
hindi
already
pa
named
appoint,
2
parang
names,
diname
no?
potential.
Suggestion, no?
So they will have to issue an executive order.
Kasi itong commission na to, ang sinasabi nga nila, will have really superpowers to make sure that they're able to investigate and they can issue subpoenas. Although I think in the issuance of subpoena, it may require an act of Congress.
Oo nga
for the
Sabi ko,
creation of
hindi
a
ata
commission.
kaya yun by executive order. Yeah.
So, we'll see. I'm sure naman maraming magagaling na abogado sa gobyerno at sa pribadong sektor na siguro tutulong naman how to form. Pero at the end of the day, at least pag nakita natin na may... Kasi the last time that the commission was created was long time ago. And now we really have a commission that will be focused on the corruption that happened in the Department of Public Works, not only in flood control projects, but in any of the projects that the DPWH and the contractors and some of our lawmakers were involved in. So, offhand lang, Attorney Luke, siguro medyo a bit premature na tinatanong kita kasi di pa natin nakita yung batas, no, executive order itself. But sa inyong pananaw, ito ba'y magandang direksyon na talagang magkaroon ng independent commission aside from the ongoing House investigation and aside from the ongoing investigation by the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee?
The idea is good. Pero ang any good idea, kapag yung origins o yung pagpapanganak nito sa implementation level ay mali na, masisira lang din ang good idea mo. Unang-una na, bakit hindi binuksan sa consultative process sa civil society yan? Bakit hindi tinanong ang mga iba't ibang stakeholders, ang taong bayan? Sino bang maganda, unang-una? Sino bang mga magandang member ng mga committee yan? Diba? What we want is really an independent commission, right? So meaning to say, hindi beholden sa appointing authority. Hindi ka natin alam sino pinipili. Why should all of this be done under wraps? Tapos i-announce na lang. Dapat man lang, merong public consultation, may public participation. Marami namang civil society groups dyan. Di ba? Marami rin kaming i-recommend. Tayo, di ba? From the di ba, citizens. Marami tayong gustong i-recommend. Mga former justice of known probity and integrity. Mga COA auditors. Mga anti-graft advocacy groups. We have a lot of ideas in order to come up with that commission. Pero kasi kapag gawin mo yung commission na in-appoint lang ng presidente and what we really fear is beholden to the wishes of the appointing authority, magiging half-baked din kasi.
Meron ng 2 names na flinote. Mayor Benji Magalong and former DPWH Secretary Rogelio Singson. What are your thoughts on the integrity and competence of those 2 people kung sila yung mapunta sa commission?
I'm okay with Mayor Benji Magalong. Crusader yan against corruption. In fact, matagal na yan na ini-expose niya yung mga SOP na yan.
Oo nga, tagal na. Partner, bago pa maging scandal to, siya yung isa sa mga nauna talaga eh.
Matagal na.
Yeah.
The other one, I still am not so familiar. Pero siyempre, pag nakita naman natin.
Si Secretary Babes, dating DPWH Secretary, noong panahon ni President Aquino.
And he did, I think, address the corruption. Parang wala akong naririnig na issues masyado on. I mean, I know the system has been there for a long time, pero parang ano niya ata na-suppress.
Disclosure, kilala ko, kaibigan ko, kasama ko sa trabaho dati sa private sector. At recently, inawardan lang ng isang prestigious award sa management. No? So, in terms of integrity, probity, as you mentioned, mukha namang Secretary Babes would have it. Plus the fact na sometimes kulang yung just being honest eh. Kailangan din alam mo yung sistema.
And he is from the DPWH
Nagaling sa
before.
DPWH. So
Oo.
malaking
And
bagay
engineer
din
din
yun.
siya, di ba?
I believe so. He is also an engineer.
Yeah.
Pero maganda rin yung suggestion mo, Attorney Luke. No? Perhaps, and I'm sure, ang gobyerno naman ay nakikinig sa tingin ko. Sasabihin nila, sige, maganda idea. Sino kaya ang kagaya ng ginawa nila sa Kongreso? Now, I don't know how effective it has been, pero di ba sa Kongreso for the very first time. And in fairness to Speaker Martin, no, ito ginawa niya. He allowed certain civil society groups to be in the future to be part of the budgeting process para mas transparent daw. So siguro naman, baka pwede rin dito no, sa pagpipili ng pwedeng umupo sa komisyon.
It is an opening given by, opening na binibigay ng gobyerno. Ang trabaho natin ay pasukan ang opening na yan at siguraduhin na yung binuksan na pinto ay hindi isasara. No, kaya tayo nag-i-insist sa independent investigation or commission.
Yes.
Nag-i-insist na hindi beholden to anyone.
Yes.
Kasi sigurado ako, tatamaan both ang Marcos, Duterte, whoever dito. And you see what's going on right now, right? Like there's an effort by some politicians aligned with Duterte to shield the Duterte-aligned senators or congressmen. There's also an effort with those aligned with Marcos to shield the Marcos-aligned public officials. And gusto nila na yung investigasyon into the flood control will only be limited to the other camp. Itong other camp will only be limited to this. An independent commission should steer clear of that. At talagang tatamaan ang dapat tatamaan. Tatamaan man ang kaalyado ni Marcos, tatamaan man ang alyado ni Duterte.
Yeah, and that's good. That's a very good point. Kasi napansin ko nga sa witnesses, takot din sila. So pagdating sa Senate hearing, may mga napangalanan na members of Congress. Pagdating naman sa Congress, members ng Senate. Pero hindi sila, they won't speak pag nandun sila sa House, pointing to any of the incumbent or senators pag nasa Senate ka, or any of the congressmen pag nasa Congress ka. Eh, syempre naman, that's their turf, no?
Yes.
But thank you so much, Attorney Luke. And final message doon sa mga netizens that are now engaged in investigative social media. Kasi talaga sila minsan yung mga nagpapalutang ng sarili nilang findings, no?
Correct.
Pati yung resibo daw ng mga pictures ng mga politicians or ill-gotten wealth.
This process involves not just the government. Ang gobyerno natin ay magre-respond lang din sa public clamor sa ating pagkamuhi. And I would like to invoke what Mayor Vico said. Gagawin nating, ano yung sinabi niya?
Nakakadiri.
Nakakadiri ang korupsyon.
Nakakadiri ulit.
Gusto kong dagdagan. Gagawin dapat nating kagalit-galit ang korupsyon. Kasi dahil sa galit na pwede nating i-express, diyan titino ang ating gobyerno. And this process should involve us na hindi dapat tinatanggap na ang gobyerno natin korap at bulok.
Thank you so much, Attorney Luke. Very well said. Thank you for joining us and sharing your perspectives on this very timely and controversial issue.
Tonight's discussion reminds us that corruption is not only about numbers and audits. It's also about trust, perception, and accountability.
And as the debate on flaunted wealth and corruption continues, so must our vigilance in protecting both public trust and constitutional rights. This is Abogado. Good night.